Well, hey folks, welcome back to the Movie NP, the vlog where I review films and provide you the success tips that we can learn from these films. Tonight's film that we're going to review is After the Hunt. This was recently released in 2025 directly to Amazon Prime Video. It was produced by Amazon. It carries a rating of R. It is 2 hours and 18 minutes long. It has an IMDb rating of 5.9 out of 10 and a Rotten Tomatoes rating of 37%, which unfortunately, folks, I would probably agree with those numbers, and we'll discuss that shortly as to why. It was written by Nora Garrett, directed by Luca Guadagnino. It stars Julia Roberts, Ayo Edebiri, Andrew Garfield, and Michael Stahlbarg. Sorry if I, destroyed those names there. So the tagline for the film is "Not everything is supposed to make you feel comfortable," and that's an excellent tag for the film. So the film is listed as a psychological thriller. I would call it more of a mystery, and I'll explain to you why. I'm not going to do my typical scene by scene because we would be here for hours, and I'm not going to get into the in-depth analysis, the philosophy, the symbolism. I might do a second part because I found it's all very interesting, and that's the actual one reason I did like this film. The main reason I would agree with the ratings for IMDb and Rotten Tomatoes isn't the content of the film as much as it is the length of the film. I really feel like the writer and the director could have said what they had to say within an hour and a half, the length of most modern movies, instead of dragging it out for almost 2.5 hours. One of the reasons I did like the film is because it is rather cerebral, and it goes into a lot of deep philosophical questions about society, about each other. But again, I think this is probably too much for most viewers. So spoiler alert, I'm going to go through the basic plot of the film and where this film leads. So the film revolves around the main character played by Roberts, which is Alma Imhoff, who is a philosophy professor at Yale, and the two supporting characters, her friend and co-worker Hank, who is the associate professor of philosophy, and one of the apt pupils, or one of Elma's star students, Maggie. So the film starts off at a dinner party that Elma is hosting for some of her colleagues and a few select students. And really, within 10-15 minutes, I was really ready to turn this off because this dinner scene was just so pretentious. I just felt like, for lack of a better term, all the characters were enjoying smelling their own farts and each other's farts, and but I guess that's kind of the point, is to make you a little uncomfortable, and this dinner party certainly does make you a little uncomfortable. So quickly it's brought up that Elma and Hank are both up for tenure. There's a little debate over that, about what if one gets it over the other one, yada yada yada, and discussion breaks out. Maggie, the star student here, becomes a little uncomfortable, and she excuses herself to go use the restroom. She heads off to use the restroom and can't find any toilet paper, so she starts nosing around and ends up finding, in the process, an envelope that has been taped to the inside bottom of one of the cabinets, very, very low to the ground. So obviously it's been hidden there. So what do? You untape the envelope and look through the contents, because that's what I would do, right? So in this envelope ends up being an old picture, what looks to be like a handkerchief, a men's handkerchief, and a newspaper clipping that interestingly, is written in German. So again, what does she do, or what would we all do? That's right. She takes the newspaper clipping and leaves the rest behind, and puts it all back up in the envelope and tapes it back up where she found it. So she comes back to the main party. The party winds down, and she tells Elma that Hank has offered to walk her home, so she's going to head off with Hank. They do so, and what ends up happening is the next day, Maggie doesn't show up for school. What you quickly learn is the film is really a love triangle type story. So everyone's wondering what happened to Maggie. Even Hank asks, has anybody seen Maggie? What's going on? And no one knows until Elma arrives home. When Elma arrives home, she finds a rather downtrodden Maggie sitting on her front stairs, kind of looking like a bit of a caged animal. So she asks Maggie what's going on, and Maggie proceeds to tell her, well, the party last night, Hank offered to walk me home. We got to my door. He asked to come up for a nightcap. I know I shouldn't have allowed him to come up, but I did. He got even a little bit more tipsy up in my apartment, and then as he was leaving, he kissed me. And I didn't appreciate that, so I told him to stop, and he wouldn't stop, and he crossed the line, quote unquote. So Elma responds to her saying, well, why are you telling me this? I mean, what's it all about? And Maggie responds with, well, with your history, quote unquote, I would think that you'd want to help me. And so for some reason, this word history triggers Elma. So Elma responds not in the supporting professor that you would expect, but in basically trauma shaming, asking Maggie, is she sure this happened? I mean, Hank, you both were pretty tipsy when you left. So of course Maggie takes offense of this and becomes even more defensive. So she doesn't really spell out exactly what happened, other than, quote unquote, Hank has crossed the line. So it's insinuated that he has sexually assaulted her, but she doesn't specifically spell that out. And that is one of the things that the filmmakers is looking for here. They want that ambiguity because they want you as the viewer to make the decision for yourself of what has occurred here. So following this, the next day, Elma arrives to work, and Hank approaches her saying, did you hear what Maggie's saying? It's horrible, none of it's true. So he weaves his whole story to Elma that the reason why he went up to her apartment, although he realized that he shouldn't have, is because he realized that her whole dissertation was plagiarized, and he wanted to find more proof of this plagiarization by going up to her apartment. But none of what she's saying happened. I did not sexually assault her. And in essence, what he does is he asks Elma for her support to defend him against Maggie. Elma basically brushes him off because she realizes that she doesn't want to get stuck in the middle of a scandal. She knows what this is going to lead to. She's up for tenure, and in some regards, rightfully so. She doesn't want to be sucked down into this. But unfortunately for Elma, her actions or desire to not get sucked in actually pull her down even further into the drama. So to cut things off at the pass, what Elma does is she approaches her boss, the dean of the philosophy department, explains to him what has transpired, and in essence says that she does not want anything to do with it. So please don't drag me in. There's an interesting scene or an exchange during this scene where the dean offers Elma some Jameson whiskey, and she notices that he has like top shelf scotch in the bar on his desk. So she asks him, "Do you just keep the top shelf stuff for show?" And his response was, "Yeah, unfortunately, being the dean, I found out that it's more about optics than it is about substance." And this is a key feature of the film, and kind of comes up a couple times in a couple different ways. And like I said, I could go really down the rabbit hole here, but I will be here for hours, so I'll save it for maybe a second video. So what transpires next is that Maggie bumps into Elma at a lecture. Elma tries to warn her that Hank is in there and he shouldn't go in. Maggie becomes defensive of this. Why should I have to hide? He's the culprit here. He's the one that did wrong. And so that kind of blows up. So in the next scene or two, what transpires is that Maggie asks to come over Elma's place, which Elma agrees. During this meeting, Maggie tells Elma that she thinks that she is going to press charges and maybe even release a story because she's been approached by some journalists. Elma's response to this is absolutely not. You should just let this blow over. You need to look at the long picture or the long view. Your career is going to depend on white men, and you don't want any of them fearful of you, thinking that they're going to be the next one accused. And of course, Maggie does not take this well. She kind of flies off the handle and leaves. And next thing you know, she publishes a tell-all story in the Yale daily newspaper. So upon this story hitting the headlines, Hank is of course fired. Next thing you know, Hank shows up at Elma's class and basically has a full meltdown in front of everyone about how this is destroying his career and how basically a little lying bitch that Maggie is, etc., etc. Of course, Elma again tries to smooth things over, telling him, like, look, you'll go get a job at another university, this will all blow over, yada, yada, yada. So Hank, of course, storms off. He blames her for much of what's happened because he claims that this all happened because he didn't support, or Elma did not support him the way he wanted her to. Following this, for whatever reason, we get back into the whole subplot of this letter that Maggie found, and Maggie decides to translate the letter and finds out that what the letter is Elma retracting a story that she accused an older man of sexual assault when she was younger. So Maggie decides she's going to kind of have an intervention for Elma, meets Elma, tells her she read the letter or read the newspaper clipping. I'm sorry, here it is back, and I really think that you need to go to counseling for this. And Elma just blows up. So next thing you know, Elma ends up on campus with Maggie. She basically gives Maggie the what for, tells Maggie that she's lying about everything, her whole life is a lie, that basically she's only dating a woman because, this is the in thing to do, that her parents are rich and she has enough money to afford a nice place, and yet she's living in this one bedroom apartment, and it's basically all a lie and fabrication. And by the way, I knew from the get-go that your dissertation was plagiarized, and that's all fake as well. And Maggie ends up slapping her, and running off crying. A few other things transpire, but ultimately what ends up happening is Elma returns to the campus where she's met by some protesters that want answers, and Maggie collapses in pain. Maggie wakes up in the hospital room. She's approached by her husband, who tells her that the doctors tell her that she's lucky to be alive. Basically, she had multiple perforated ulcers, but we've got you stabilized and you're going to be okay right now. What transpires after this is that Elma begins to reveal to her husband that what truly transpired back in the day was that she was the one that sought after this older man, that basically she was a teen, 16, 17, something like that, and this man was one of her father's friends, business associates. Dad would bring him over for dinner and such, and she pursued him until he basically gave in and they had a sexual affair. Then unfortunately he breaks it off with her, telling her that he needs to find someone more appropriate, ends up dating some other woman, and then begins to bring this woman around where she feels that he was intentionally trying to hurt her and kind of shove it in her face that he's now dating this more age-appropriate woman. So her desire for vengeance and wanting to hurt him, she released the whole story of him sexually assaulting her, which of course destroyed his life, destroyed his career. And because she felt bad about this, later on, a few years after this, she decided to retract the story, which of course is what the news clipping is about. And that unfortunately, even after she retracted the story, he suicided. So she has been carrying this trauma and pain for basically her entire life, which answers why she responded to Maggie the way she did, and how this is manifested physically in her life is we see that she's in chronic pain. We see that she doubles over multiple times through the film, clutching her stomach, which is obviously these ulcers. Multiple scenes where she is thrown up in the toilet. But then her husband, Frederick, reframes all this and says to her, well, it's not really your fault. You were a child at the time, and it was his responsibility as an adult to prevent this from happening. And she, of course, argues that no, I pursued him. I didn't give him a choice. And Frederick's response to her is, we all have a choice, and it was his responsibility to prevent this from happening, not yours. So in essence, you really did nothing wrong. All of the misfortune that fell upon him was of his own doing, not yours. Which, yeah, I agree with. So yeah, that's where the film kind of ends, and next we have fast forwards 5 years later. We see Elma, and she is now the dean of the philosophy department, and she's answering an email which we find out is from Maggie about being at a conference, and it was nice to see you, and would you like to meet up for a drink? So she meets up with Maggie in a diner. Interestingly enough, it's the same diner from earlier in the film where kind of Hank meets everyone, and they have a kind of a pleasant conversation, but you can tell underneath it's very uneasy. And Maggie basically asks Elma, was it all worth it? Are you happy? And Elma's response is yes. So with that, Maggie excuses herself, gets up and walks out. The last scene is Elma basically looking out the window, watching her walk away. Basically turns towards the camera, says, check please, and the director calls cut, breaking the fourth wall. So let's get to our success tips and life hacks. So life hack number 1 is face the truth even when it is ugly or uncomfortable. The point here is that if we allow these things to become buried, all they do is they lead to further problems. Like I've discussed, I think, in other reviews, if you keep on pressing things down, the pressure is going to eventually get too much that it's going to come out in ways that we don't want it to. In this case, for Elma, it came out physically in her ulcers and chronic illness, and ultimately kind of destroyed the relationships around her. And here's a quote to illustrate this from Gloria Steinem that states, "The truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off." Success tip number 2 is isolation makes fear worse. And this is very true. I don't care whether you're looking at recovery from substance use or trauma, but really it's community that helps heal a lot of that, and support from loved ones, friends. Don't hide the emotions, get them out there and deal with them. And study after study shows that face-to-face talk therapy is often equally effective, if not more effective, than medications, and particularly if you're just doing medications alone. So I advocate for everyone to find a therapist. Sometimes we just need to get a sounding board and get. I do believe that sometimes it's not even really about the therapist as much as we need to hear it with our own ears. We need someone to kind of bounce those ideas and those feelings off of, and by reflecting them off that individual, we can then hear it, learn from it, and move forward. So life hack number 3 here is to listen to your gut and follow your intuition. When your instincts say something is wrong, listen to it. Oftentimes our body can sense things long before our mind can process them, and we have to kind of hone that skill. We have to practice that skill, and one of the ways doing that is to just remain open, and when you get that little spidey sense tingling in the back of your head, to listen to it. And here's a quote by Benjamin Spock that says, "Trust yourself. You know more than you think you do." Success tip number 4 is that trauma does not disappear, it just waits. And this reflects back to success tip number 1, in that we want to address these things, because if we don't, then they get buried down and they come back in ways that haunt us later on. And Carl Jung states, "What you resist not only persists, but grows in size." Success tip number 5 is to not be afraid to ask those hard questions. I know oftentimes we don't want to ask those hard questions, and in some ways sometimes we're discouraged from doing so. But really, if you avoid it, you're not growing. You have to address those hard questions. Truth brings closure, silence breeds guilt and confusion. And here's a quote from Martin Luther King Jr. that says, "In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends." Life hack number 6 is to not allow guilt to define your identity. Look, folks, life is messy, and there's always going to be things that pop up that maybe we look back and we're not happy about. Hopefully we've dealt with it right then and there, but if not, then it lingers and it festers. But the key here is that we all make mistakes. What we need to do is we need to learn from those mistakes, and we need to move on. And there's nothing wrong with hitting the pause button, resetting, and reinventing yourself so that you can move forward. And here's a quote by Ariana Huffington to illustrate this. Failure is not the opposite of success. It is part of success. And that is very, very true. Life hack number 7 is when emotions flare up, to slow down, take a breath, and not allow it to escalate you. So this reminds me a little bit of the character of Polly in Goodfellas. There's a statement that Henry Hill makes that says something like, Polly was slow because he didn't need to move fast. And I think that there's a lot that we can learn from that. Polly did not act impulsively. Polly was the captain, the godfather of that family. He kept everyone safe. He kept everyone in line. He did not make decisions lightly or impulsively. He thought through the actions, and that is what kept the family together and kept the family safe. On a side note, I think it also helped that he didn't talk business over the telephone lines, which is, I think, a good thing to do, but that's for another group of success tips discussions for another day. And here's a quote from Viktor Frankl to underline this. Between stimulus and response, there is always space. Life hack number 8 is that we need to look at the past as life lessons, not as punishment or to haunt you for the rest of your life. There's quite a difference between reflection and rumination, and we need to be careful to avoid rumination. That just leads down a circular logical path that is just going to stick you in the mud and mire you down. But reflection, on the other hand, is a positive thing that is encouraged. But the key point of the reflection is to learn from those mistakes and to move forward from them. And here's a quote from Socrates that states, "The unexamined life is not worth living." Success tip number 9 is empathy is a survival skill. There's more and more data that comes out that the successful leaders, successful people are actual naturals at being able to read people's emotions. They call that emotional intelligence. And I do think there's a lot to say about that. I think that if we look at this film, certainly if Elmo would have been more empathetic towards Maggie and Hank, probably none of the negativity that befell upon her later in the film would have happened. She would have been able to avoid all of it and probably helped Maggie and Hank in the process. So the key here is that understanding motives makes conflict easier to navigate. And I find that to be very true. Here is a quote by Ian McLaren that states, "Be kind, for everyone you meet is fighting a hard battle." And success tip number 10 is that forgiveness is not a weakness, it's a liberation. Forgiving others helps release that emotional weight that you carry around, and you really can't move forward if you're constantly dragging stuff and carrying a bunch of baggage along with you from the past. Now, we really need to be able to forgive. I'm not saying forget, because we need to learn from our life lessons, and we need to learn who we can trust and who we can't trust. But definitely, you're doing yourself more of a favor by forgiving and moving on than to keeping that grudge, because that grudge is just gonna hold you down and become an emotional weight on your chest. And here's a quote from Lewis B. Smedes, which says, "To forgive is to set a prisoner free and discover that that prisoner was you." Well, that's it for tonight, folks. Please press like and subscribe. Please comment. Let me know what your thoughts are. Did you pick something up in After the Hunt that I didn't? Uh, would you like me to go into more detail about all the philosophical content, all the symbolism, etc., etc.? If that's something that you're interested in, please let me know. I like doing those things, but they also take a lot of time. So if you guys aren't interested in it, I'd rather spend the time doing something that you are interested in. Also, please check out my second channel, 57 Flavors, where I do some cooking demonstrations if you're interested in that sort of thing. I try to doctor up some meals for you, and so check those out. And as always, my prescription is to try out 2 of those life hacks and call me in the morning. We'll see you next time. Thanks. Bye bye. And if you or a loved one is in crisis, please dial the National 988 Suicide Hotline or text 741 741. Suicide is never the answer. Suicide only passes the pain on to your loved one.